Hi, everyone. This is Raquel.
Hi, and this is Jennifer.
Welcome to Madness Cafe.
This is a feminist podcast where we talk about women's issues, politics, and health and wellness.
And where those issues intersect. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Madness Cafe. Today, Jennifer and I are joined by Susan Servais. Susan is the retired CEO of a nonprofit, the Massachusetts Health Council, and the daughter of the author of the memoir that Jennifer and I are holding up. It's called Escape from Dachau, a true story of survival, courage, and a daring escape in the face of unthinkable evil by Kathy Mueller-Slonim. We're very excited to talk to you about your mother's book, Susan. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be joining you.
We were wondering, number one, how did your mom come to write this book? And how did you come to be the one who is doing the publicity promoting of the book?
You know, that is a really good question, Jennifer. First of all, my mom and my grandparents never spoke a word about the Holocaust. It
Wow.
was not mentioned. I knew that my mom and my grandparents came from Germany, but it was never discussed. After the Holocaust, around the year 1960, the German government and all the cities in Germany started inviting people that survived, Jews that survived, to come back in a program called Our Lost Citizens. My mom was invited every year and said no. She never wanted to step foot again on German soil. But around the year 2000, my brother, sister, and I convinced her that it would be really good closure for her to go. So finally, in the year 2000, she accepted the invitation from the mayor of Stuttgart, which is where she was. They invited her to come with one guest she could bring. And my mom wrote to them and said, I will come if I can bring my daughter and my 15-year-old granddaughter so that 3 generations can dance on Hitler's grave. Now, as we know, Hitler's not buried in Germany, but it was more of a philosophical thing.
Of course.
So while we were there on this program, different people started talking about their experience, what happened to their family, what happened to their friends. And shocking to us, or to my daughter and me, all of a sudden, my mom opened up and she started talking about what happened. And we were absolutely shocked. I had never heard any of this before. And then when we came back to America, my mom sat down and wrote this memoir. She had one request, that we don't do anything with it until she passed. So she wrote this in 2000, and my mom passed away in 2021. And I didn't understand that at first, but now I do, because she would not have wanted to do this. She would not have wanted to discuss it, to go over it and over it again. And in fact, my brother and sister, we did a lot of the editing because it was fragmented and we had to, work on the text. And they really did not want to do the same thing, to keep going over it and talking about the horror of it and what grandpa went through when he was in the concentration camp. I became sort of the designated speaker for mom's book. That's how it is that I'm the one that is really talking about it and interviewing and doing those kinds of things.
Well, how is that for you then? How does that feel to come and talk about this history in your family and in Germany?
Well, it's really sad, but it's important because I focus on the fact that in this day and age, there are a lot of Holocaust deniers, and there is huge anti-Semitism around the world now. And so I really feel like that's my mission, to say to people and to get it out there that maybe it can happen again. And we need to make sure that our friends and that our allies back us up and have our backs, which is not what happened in Germany. And there
Right.
were what we call collaborators, the next door neighbor, the person that lived downstairs. And the one thing that we can make sure is that our friends and allies stand with us to say hatred is not acceptable. I feel like that's my mission. And that's
Mhm.
one of the things that gets me through these kinds of interviews and talking about what happened to my family.
First off, thank you for talking about this and for supporting and encouraging your mom in writing all this down and all of the research that
Yeah,
y'all had
thank
to
you.
do.
Yeah, thank
Like,
you.
honestly, it's amazing that the documents that y'all have pictures of in here. I mean, documents that so many people don't still have. So I
My
think
mom
that's
kept those.
fantastic.
Yeah, my mom kept them well hidden because I had never seen a lot of the documents that you see in the book. I
Mhm.
have the originals now, the passports, the
Right.
applications to get out of Germany, all of that stuff. It's just one of those situations where my grandmother's brothers and sisters, and
Mhm.
even my grandfather's brother, they got out early. They saw the writing on the wall.
Right.
My grandfather's sister and her children and husband were murdered at Auschwitz. But they begged my grandfather to leave early on, late 1920s. But my grandfather, as you read in the book, was a war hero for Germany in World War One. My grandmother and her sisters volunteered for the German Red Cross in World War One. So
Right.
my grandfather kept had blinders on. He kept saying, "Oh, those brown shirts, they're just a bunch of hoodlums. They're harmless," which is
Yeah.
what scares me about what is going on today. Because my
Yes.
grandfather denied that they were anything but troublemakers. We are loyal Germans. There's nothing that's going to happen to us. That was his philosophy, as much as my grandmother's family begged him to get out. And then, of
Mhm.
course, it got to a point where it was too late and you
Yeah.
couldn't get out. He was a very successful he had a manufacturing business that reminds me very much of Amazon, actually. He manufactured everything from housewares to hardware and distributed it all over Germany and beyond. He made friends wherever he went. His clients loved him, and he was very, very successful. So they had a great life. It's hard for me to think if I was in a really great situation where I loved my city, I loved my friends, I had a successful business,
Yeah.
how easy is it to just pick up and take off?
It's
But on the
not.
other hand, when you see your family members and your friends being beaten on the street,
Yeah.
being harassed and spit on and all of that, I mean, you leave, you should leave. But
Yeah.
he just didn't believe it.
It was his country, it was his home. I mean, I would
Absolutely.
imagine that it's incredibly difficult to think of your home where you had been for generations
Generations.
and to think that I've served my country, I'm a I'm a good citizen, I build relationships, I help people. It's hard to think, "Oh, my country will turn against me."
It is. And that was his attitude exactly. Things like this were happening from 1929 on. And
Mhm.
then, I mean, the worst thing was in 1933 when Hitler became
Yeah.
chancellor.
Yeah.
And, and even before, but really at that point, 1933, Jews really started leaving Germany, as many as could get out. They were flooding out of Germany. At some point, 1936, that's when my mom was thrown out of her public school. Jews weren't allowed. The brown shirts now were bigger and bigger numbers. They
Yeah.
roamed the streets, harassing and beating innocent Jews, putting swastikas on businesses and homes. And in 1938, shortly before Kristallnacht, which happened on November 9th, they took his business, they took his
Yeah.
car, they took his home. And at that point, America had closed its doors. You couldn't go to America. I have family in Argentina, in Israel, in Switzerland. You couldn't get into America. Then at some point, it didn't even matter if those countries would let you in. You could not get out of Germany. You just
Yeah.
couldn't.
Yeah.
You
So
brought up your mom being thrown out of school. I wanted to read this quick passage from the book on page 35. Kathy was 8 years old on the day in 1936 that she was called into the principal's office at Johannes Schule, Stuttgart's public elementary school. She had been a student there for more than 2 years. In the principal's office, Kathy was told she would have to leave school because Jews were no longer allowed there. Can't even imagine for a child, family as a whole, what that must feel like. And I know this is going to sound really strange, but I went to see Wicked yesterday, and there was a point in the movie where the professor was removed from the school. I don't know if the two of you have seen Wicked.
I haven't
Yeah.
yet. Mm-mm.
And I asked the people sitting next to me, probably because I was reading this book, I was like, is this movie about the Nazis? And they were like, yes, this movie is about being othered. No
Yeah.
matter where you are, no matter what situation, it is about being othered. This is the existential story of humans. I was just really touched by how this could be any of us.
Mhm.
Any of
Yeah.
us could be othered at any time, anywhere, any place.
You're absolutely, this is the scary part.
Mhm.
And what's going on now to Jewish communities around the world,
Yeah.
this is early 1933.
Mhm.
This is exactly what my mom remembered,
Yeah.
and what my grandparents and what they went through. They Jews couldn't work for the government, you couldn't own a house, you couldn't have a car or whatever. That was the day that they started burning down the
Yeah.
Jewish homes, synagogues, businesses. And like I said, by then it was too late to get out of Germany. Whoever was left and not already sent to camps was then rounded up and sent to the death camps.
And how did your grandfather end up at the first concentration camp?
That's
Dachau.
so that's right.
Yeah.
So on November 10th, the day after Kristallnacht, the Nazis came into, like, they came into all Jews' homes that were still
Mhm.
around. They came into my mom's house, and they dragged my grandfather out of the house in front of my grandmother and took him away.
Yeah.
Because of some family connections, they found out that he had been brought to Dachau.
Yeah.
So that is how he got to Dachau on November 10th of 1938. It's interesting because the way they found that out is the whole Emanuel Rosenfeld, aka Max
Max
Emanuel.
Evade. Yeah.
So my grandmother's first cousin was a mathematician and an economist. His name was Emanuel Rosenfeld. Schach, that name may sound familiar because he was tried at the Nuremberg trials. Schach, at that time in the late 1920s, was the head of the largest bank in Germany, the Reich Bank.
Mm.
My grandmother's first cousin, Emanuel Rosenfeld, worked directly under Schach at the Reich Bank. He was the brains, he was the mathematician, he was the economist. When Hitler became chancellor, he took Schach from the Reich Bank and made him the Minister of Finance and Economics for the Third Reich.
Mhm.
And who did Schach bring with him? The brains of the bank, Emanuel Rosenfeld. That was his name at the time. Now, Emanuel Rosenfeld actually works for the Third Reich and has identifications identifying him as someone that works for the Third Reich. Okay. So now 36, 37 comes along. First of all, Emanuel Rosenfeld is seeing what's going on to Jews in the streets, how they're being dragged away, how their businesses are being burned. So he left. He left the government. Out of fear, he changed his name from Emanuel Rosenfeld to Max Emanuel. He changed his name. He went into hiding, but he was very smart. He kept his Third Reich identification papers.
Smart man.
Yeah. He basically was waiting to try to get a visa to come to America. And I can tell you that the only reason, okay, so the doors had already been closed to go to America because of his position with the Reich Bank and with the Third Reich. The American government knew that he knew where the German money was. He knew what banks they were dealing with. And so he had applied and he was waiting to get a visa to come to America. At the same time, my grandmother's brother, who was in America, and a brother that was in Luxembourg, because they were one of 14 children. They had all left, got word that grandpa had been dragged off to concentration camp. And they got in touch with Max Emanuel and said, you need to do something. You need to help him. Now, think about that. A day or two before, his visa to get out of Germany and go to America comes through, and he gets a call from family members. You have to do something. You've got to get Adolf. By the way, my grandfather's name was Adolf. You've got to get him out of the concentration camp. What would you do? What would I
Wow.
do? What
I
would I
don't
do?
I would like
That's
to think I would have done what
Max
Max
Emanuel did.
did. I thought it was really great that the way that the book is written, you see the sort of like, "Oh my god, what am I doing?
The
Oh, but I can't
tension.
leave him.
Yeah,
Oh, crap, I'm gonna get found out, and then I'm gonna end up in here. What good am I to anybody? And but
yeah.
wait, I can't leave them in there." Like that tension and that,
Yes.
that I don't I would like to think that I would have been a hero, but
Who
I
knows?
don't
Yeah.
know. I don't
Well, it's
know.
funny because the reviews on Amazon, a lot of them say I couldn't put the book down. I had to know I could not put the book down because I was freaking out about what's he going to do? How's he going to deal with this? Because you know what? Really, he gave himself a death sentence.
Yeah.
By not getting out, he gave himself a death sentence. Keep in mind, he had identification papers that said that he was a member of the Third Reich. And the interesting thing about that, now think about it. Who who was probably guarding all, first of all, just for so your audience knows, hopefully they'll buy the book and read the book. But he made the decision to drive the 400 kilometers in the middle of the night to go to Dachau and try to get my grandfather out of the concentration. No one ever escaped a concentration camp. It did not happen. It just did not happen. If you got to the gate, you were shot. So that just did not happen. And how he got him out, I'll leave that as the mystery. But he chose to drive the 400 miles. Now, there were German Nazi checkpoints
Mhm.
every few miles. And the interesting thing is that most probably, who's at these checkpoints at midnight, 1, 2, 3 in the morning? It's not the commandants. It's
Exactly.
probably young, scared Nazi soldiers that if they do anything wrong, they're going to be taken out in the backfield. So the interesting thing is that the front of this identification packet identified him as a member of the Third Reich, a high ranking official. Had they opened them instead of saying, oh, go on through, go on through, they would have seen the name in those papers was Emanuel Rosenfeld,
Mhm.
clearly a Jewish name.
Yeah.
Maybe they would have thought the papers were stolen because he was going by the name Max Emanuel. So again, he lucked out.
Yeah.
He escaped a death sentence. Every step of the way, he escaped a death sentence, but he
Yeah.
made the decision to see what he could do.
Was it
And
luck or was it fate?
Good question. Good
right.
question. I
And
don't I don't believe in coincidences at all. I believe that
mm,
everything is a miracle, but if we
Mhm.
don't believe in miracles, then we don't see them as that.
Mhm.
And so I definitely think there were a number of miracles that happened for him and for my grandfather.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sounds
And
like someone on the other side was helping out.
exactly. And,
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you brought up people's reactions to the book because honestly, and I was thinking this as I was reading the book, that it reads so much like a novel as opposed to a memoir. The pacing of it, I mean, of course, generally you're gonna figure out, okay, we know what happens, we because the book is here. But I was so caught up in especially the scene when Max is at Dachau and he's trying to get
Get him
Adolf,
out.
and it's so good. This book is so well written and so
Thank you.
much is packed into,
I
I mean,
know.
in this tiny book. I really appreciate the couching all of this in the historical purview of giving the historical the brief
Yes.
synopsis of Jews and Germany going back to the 1200s and putting basically all of this into a historical timeline and providing that framework for what happened in the 20s and 30s and 40s in Germany. And so I thought that was so helpful. Like a lot of that we don't learn in history.
I'm really glad that you bring that up because it was a debate. We're wondering if it was appropriate. It was added. It was not part of mom's memoir. It was research that we did, but we thought it was important for a couple reasons. First of all, we thought it was very important to point out how immersed, loyal, and committed the Jews were to German society. They were not only doctors, lawyers, engineers, architects, they were business leaders, they were artists and musicians, very involved with science and technology. Germans like James Franck, who won a Nobel Prize in physics, Albert Einstein, Kafka, the writer. We thought it was really important to show that these were German Jews that were really contributing to German society. But we also thought it was important to point out that it's not the first time that Jews had been abused in German society, going back to when it was Franconia. And like you said, in the 1200s, the Jewish merchants were forced at that time by the German emperor to add a tax to products that they were selling. And it was the
Hmm,
government.
sounds like a tariff.
Right.
Hmm.
Well, the thing is that it made the population angry at the Jewish people. And they tried to explain that the government is forcing us to put, we don't decide. They thought, the people thought that they were raising the prices or whatever. And they were saying, no, the government is forcing us to tax the things that we are selling you. But it caused a lot of anger towards the Jewish community. Then in the 1300s, the bubonic plague. Did you read about that?
Yep,
Isn't that
yep.
Yeah.
interesting?
Yeah, and
So,
they're like, "Oh, there must be something with the
so,
Jews that not
to,
as many of them died." Because
so
they're
the,
washing their hands, you
yeah, the,
germ-ridden
and actually,
weirdo.
I learned this on the trip. We were taken around by the Minister of Cultural Affairs for the German government. I did not know this. He told us that, well, he was telling us all these different things about the history. In the 1300s, we blamed the Jews for the bubonic plague because not a lot of Jews got the bubonic plague. But now science has shown us, the Jewish rituals. You shower in the morning, you wash your hands before the meal, you wash your hands after the meal, you wash before you go to bed. And these are not habits that the general population had. And so now, in hindsight, with science, it's recognized that, that's probably why the Jewish people did not get the bubonic plague. It's not that they were poisoning the water or they were yeah. So again, they exiled or murdered the Jews from 1300 to 1350, and at that time, Frankfurt alone had 19,000 Jews.
Mhm.
By 1400, there were none. There were 0. I learned a lot of this history from the trip to Germany, where they were really very open about the history of the Jewish people in Germany, so that Nazi Germany was not the first time the Jews encountered serious problems in that region.
Now, your mom on that trip was trying to find, and somewhat successfully did, trying to find some nuns that had helped her
Oh my
in
goodness.
her early childhood. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Well, my mom survived because the day after Kristallnacht, November 10th, when grandpa was dragged off to the concentration camp, my grandmother took my mom to the Catholic Church, Sisters of St. Joseph, where she was hidden.
Mm.
And they taught her, like so many German Jewish children that were hidden by the Catholic Church. She was taught all of the liturgy, the Hail Mary, all of those things. And the Nazis would come in and line the children up and ask them questions. And of course, the children knew all the Catholic things they needed to know, and they survived. And in fact, a number of years later, the head of that order, his name is in the book, it escapes me, he was sent off to Auschwitz and killed.
Right,
And they
right.
say, uh, no reason was given, but we know why. We
Mhm.
know that he was murdered because he was hiding Jewish children. So, anyway, we go on this trip, and the one thing my mom wanted to do was find the Sisters of St. Joseph. When the Allies bombed Germany, that order, the church and everything had been destroyed, and they moved. They were no longer in Stuttgart or Karlsheim. They were somewhere, but we didn't really know where. Usually, they would take us wherever we wanted to go. We went to Stuttgart, we went to Kralsheim, where my grandmother was born. They took us to the cemetery where my great grandparents are buried with Albert Einstein's parents.
Oh
Wow.
my
Incredible. I have
goodness.
pictures of the graves. But
Oh, wow.
anyway,
Wow.
usually we were gone from 8 in the morning till about 7 to 8 at night. And one day we get back to the hotel, and the person at the desk says, "There's a group of nuns waiting for you in the private room over on the other side." They had gotten word that my mom was looking for them. They sat there from 9 in the morning till we got back waiting for my mom to come. And I can't even tell you the emotional, hysterical crying reunion that my mom had. Now, this is the next generation, of course, but still. And my mom made a donation to the Sisters of St. Joseph every year, and I have continued that to this day. Every Christmas, I have continued that because they hid my mom and they saved my mom.
Yeah.
And you probably know the story about Madeleine Albright. She did not know that she was Jewish.
Mhm.
She was raised Catholic, found out many, many years later that she was a Jewish child hidden by the Catholic Church, but her parents never came back to get her.
Oh, wow.
So she found out many years later. I don't even know the whole story about around that. It was a beautiful reunion. It was probably for my mom after all. The trip was amazing. We went to high schools. We did a lot of things, but that was probably the highlight for my mom, was being able to personally thank the
Oh,
descendants of the women and men that saved her life.
I love that so much, and I have to say, I just wanna give kudos to your grandmother, Kathy's mom,
Yeah,
Betty.
yeah,
How strong
I
and
know.
clever and smart and cunning did this woman have to be to first off immediately go, "Hey, let me take my little girl to the nuns
Yeah,
and ask
exactly.
them to care for my child and watch over her." And then while that's going on, she's figuring out how to get around that law or whatever that Jews had to give all of their things, their heirlooms and their things of wealth to the government. And she hid them like I don't think I'm giving anything away because I'm sure lots of
Yeah,
other
that
people
no,
did
no,
this too, but, like, hiding the valuables in the laundry soap and then taping it back up to make it look like it hadn't been opened. I mean,
exactly.
just like that kind of, and then keeping it together,
Yeah.
yeah,
Making money?
making
Yeah,
money and still caring for other people who are, need somewhere to hide. I really have an
yeah.
enormous amount of respect for your grandmother for being able to do all of that.
And the sad thing for me in my life is that I didn't know about any of this when and I was old enough to know it. My grandmother passed away when I was a senior in high school.
Mm,
So I was old enough to know, but and they never spoke about it, as I said, and I never got the opportunity to say to her what you just said. And
Hmm.
I wish I would have had the opportunity to tell her, "You have no idea how much I respect you, what you did, how you survived, all of that." I never got the opportunity because they never spoke about it, and I didn't know what she went through.
Well,
mhm,
you know that you are doing it by honoring the legacy, by bringing this
Thank
book to
you.
people, by telling the story of your family. You are
Yeah,
honoring everyone's legacy. And also, this is really important work. There are deniers out there who are trying to say
mhm,
that this did not happen.
exactly. And as I said in the beginning, that is one of my missions to make sure that people read this and know that this is a true story. This is not
mhm,
make believe. After the book came out, I got a lot of calls, emails from people saying, "Oh my gosh, my mom, my dad, my," and
Mm,
try to encourage everyone. And I don't even care what your culture is. One of my best friends is Iranian, and her family escaped Iran when the Shah was kicked out. And
similar.
I
mhm.
say to her, write that story.
Yep,
It's
Yep.
very important, these historical stories of what your parents, your grandparents went through. So I'm always trying to get Jewish people with Holocaust survivor family or anyone else that has an amazing historical background to get it in writing, to do
yeah.
it.
I just wanna read the last line of the book. Actually, I think it's the last line of the acknowledgments that you wrote in here because I think this is really important. You say, "Thanks to our families for allowing us to take time out of our busy schedules," and I think this is the important part, "to present this true story to you and all the readers who will keep the stories of the Holocaust alive through books like this one." That is so key. It is so important that we know this story and we keep it alive. We see it all the time. In fact, we're seeing it now. We're we're doomed to repeat the history that we don't know, right? And
Exactly.
even
Exactly.
though we know this, we still see things like this that are happening now, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
all of the talk about round them up and we're gonna deport them all. Hello? It's what happened with the Jews in Germany. It just kills me that the 2 things are gonna come out of what I'm gonna say here because I'm not just emoting. 2 things that come out of this are that this stuff is happening or they're talking about wanting this to happen now, right?
Yeah. And
With undocumented people here in the United States. They wanna round people up, which, it just drives me nuts. And so it's so important that we know this information and we can pay attention and see we can see the markers in our own
right.
society right now. And then the other thing that kills me about this, and this was a little bit of a shocker to me, I was so surprised when you mentioned in the book that your mom found out that high schools were in Germany were not learning the details. That it was just they were just using, the euphemism of the time before or the before time.
The before time.
And that shocked me. I always thought, well, in Germany, there's monuments everywhere to what happened. So my assumption was that, of course, everybody's being educated about it.
I think they talk about it, but they don't
Mm,
talk about they don't use the word Nazi,
mhm,
or they talk about the time before when this happened or that happened. But being there, I did not feel like they were hiding it because
okay.
and I think you just alluded to the fact that every place where a synagogue was burned to the ground, there's a monument there.
Mhm,
And every stop where the cattle cars picked up Jews, there are monuments there as a
mhm,
reminder that this place was a horrific place. I feel like the schools are not doing their part. They're not talking about the details, but at least they're not hiding the whole history. There
right.
are memorials to what happened. The thing I think that's really scary today, and it's not just for Jewish people, but for many people, the normalization of hatred. It doesn't seem to be something that is outrageous. And the normalization of anti Semitism, for example, and hatred of other groups. A lot of this, it's happening in places where Jewish people used to feel at home, academia,
Mhm,
colleges. Jewish students used to feel so comfortable and at home when they left for college. Now it's like, should I go? I'm scared. What's going to happen? I'm going to be beaten up when I walk across Harvard Yard, or someone's going to throw a rock at me. And I
yeah,
think that is the worst part of what's going on today, that nothing is being done about the normalization of anti Semitism
mhm,
and the dangerous atmosphere on college campuses like, Columbia, Harvard, and others, many, many others. And
mhm.
that's, to me, the scariest, because you're talking about
Yeah,
kids that have never done anything except want to educate themselves. You
I think
know,
on page 19 in the book, your mom explains it really well because she talks about how the Germans lost the war and then they felt they needed that somebody needed to be blamed.
yeah,
Somebody
it needs
right?
to
needed
be
to
World
be
War
somebody's
held.
One,
fault.
World War One. Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
somebody needed to be held responsible. And so it came down to they began spreading rumors about Jewish people saying that Jews shunned their duty to the country. They weren't as involved in the war. And then those rumors started to become a belief system. And we see that that's exactly what was happening in the movie Wicked. I know it's weird that I bring it up, but I bring it up because this is a universal story. This is what happened in Iran, where
Mhm,
your friend is from. This is that universal story. This is that cautionary tale that we are running into this in this country when people will use any scapegoated group. Right now, it
mhm.
could be transgender people are the scapegoated. Any group that we decide is the other, and it's their responsibility. And that is why we're failing. And that's why eggs are so
And
expensive.
that's what I mean about the normalization of hate.
Yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
Like, if
Exactly.
someone expresses a hateful attitude, they're not slammed, and no one is saying to them, "Well, what's wrong with you? You should not
yep,
say that or feel that way." Yeah.
And for years and years, people would say, oh, well, if I was in Germany, I would have stood up to the Nazis. I would have said, but how do we
yeah.
know?
How do we know?
How do we know when and where we have the courage to stand up and say, this is not right, like the Catholic Church and those people who died.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And there is a book out there called The Collaborators, and it talks about
Mm,
the German populace, how so many people just
mhm,
joined the party.
Well, your mom did talk in the book a couple times about as Jewish people were beginning to suffer and their property was taken away from them and their house and they're moved into an apartment complex, other people on the street are just going about life like nothing's going on. Everything's
mhm.
Exactly.
cool. Just
Yep.
going to my work in the morning and not
Exactly.
seeing that people are being ripped out of their homes.
Right.
Well, and people were afraid though too,
Yeah.
because the part about which I didn't know about this particular point of even parents had to give the salute, the Hitler salute to their children because their children might rat them out, and then they'd get shot in the street or taken to the camps or
What a scary, scary time.
Yeah,
what a wretched time to be
exactly.
alive.
Exactly. Yes.
Now,
Exactly.
would you like to read that piece from the prologue that we
Oh,
had?
sure.
I think
So,
it's the important point, really.
yes. It was the winter of 1961, and a young family was traveling in their blue and white Plymouth station wagon, heading toward the home of the kids' grandparents, Adolf and Betty Mueller, who lived in Albany, New York. Chuck, my brother, was 10 years old, Susan was 9, and Elise was 6. We were in the back seat of the car, trying not to get bored on the 12-hour drive from Dayton, Ohio to Albany, New York. The windows were fogged from the freezing temperatures outside. Susan started to draw pictures in the dew on the window. One of the pictures drawn was the Star of David, the Jewish star. In the front seat, their mother, Kathy, turned to check on the kids and immediately disciplined Susan in a panic to stop and erase what she had drawn on the window. The Star of David was quickly wiped away, for it was a symbol that made Kathy nervous to let others see. After all these years, she was still of the mindset to hide her Jewish identity.
I think you had said your mom never overcame her fear of people knowing you were Jewish. Tell us about that fear and why it's so impossible to let go of.
Well, you have to remember that being Jewish when she grew up was a very threatening, very scary thing. And I'm sure that she was told by the nuns in the Catholic Church, and she was told by her mother before she arrived there, don't let anyone know you're Jewish.
Yeah,
Mhm.
And that kind of sticks with you that I can't let anybody know. I mean, she was 8, 9 years old, and she's being told that she can't say anything. And it did. It's like PTSD.
Right.
Most of her friends in Dayton were Jewish, so she was able to be more open with them. But clearly, most of her life, that was not something that she wanted anybody to know if they themselves were not Jewish. She
Mhm.
always sort of held that fear.
how was
And
it for you as a child? Do you remember
I was gonna
doing
ask that.
doing the drawing?
well, it's interesting because I really don't remember. In hindsight, I remember how she was. But growing up, because my mom was always she was an optimist. She was always a very happy person. She had a lot of friends. She worked in the school system. What happened to her did not turn her into a negative, needy person. She
Mm,
was always an optimist and she never blamed the next generation. I mean, there were a lot of Jewish people that never liked anyone that was German or had German background. Not my mom. She said it's not their fault. They had, nothing to do with it. I think the thing for me is because of my mom's general attitude, I've always been also a very, positive person. And I've always believed that no matter how bad the situation is, there'll be a turnaround. I think that I got that from her because she was such a positive person all the time.
well,
You know?
and there's a huge example of a horrible situation turning around.
Right, exactly. 6 million, actually 10 million lives were
Mhm.
lost. I still feel like they were very lucky and there were miracles
Very.
involved. 6 million Jewish people and 4 million others. I'm very grateful that my family were lucky enough to survive it. And the same with all the other survivors, but it's never tainted my feeling about humanity and people and the possibilities for humanity to wake up and do good and do good.
Mm,
And that was my mom. That's exactly how my mom was.
That's
So,
such a beautiful way to think about it and a beautiful trait to bring forward. which is just awe-inspiring to me that somebody can go through the horrible things that your family went through, and your mom was still this positive, optimistic, loving person, and the things that she went through didn't instill hate in her, which I
Right.
find
Absolutely.
completely,
No.
well, that's miraculous to me.
Yeah, never did. She was always besides working in the school system, she was always volunteering for places like the Home for Unwed Mothers, or she was always just a real community servant and really always trying to help out people that were less fortunate than her. That's exactly how she was.
With all of this and talking about your mom and your family, your ancestors, what do you what do you want people to take away from reading your mom's memoir?
What I would like is, and I'm glad you're asking that question because I do talk about this a lot. I want them to understand that it's a true story, that we all have to be vigilant that these kinds of things don't happen again. But the other thing that I want to ask is when they get the book and they finish the book, please do not put it on your bookshelf. I want you to bring it to your high school library or bring it to the head of the history department in your local high school.
Yeah,
Pass the book along because we would love to get it into high school libraries. And we're trying to do a lot of that. I've been sending some out. It's available in hardback, paperback, Kindle, audiobook. But if you get the hard copy or the paperback, please, when you're done reading it, pass it along to someone else. Don't put it on your bookshelf. That's what I would like to ask.
that's
That's
awesome. Even
beautiful.
even if it's been underlined and tabbed the way that Jennifer and I have done.
Well, we had special need to do that.
Yes, you did.
Exactly,
Yes, you did.
exactly,
Well, that'll just tell people what the important points are.
Yep. Just go to the
exactly.
tab, you'll find out what you need.
Exactly.
Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you so much for coming
Thank
on today.
you.
Thank you
Thank you.
for I hope one day my daughters will love to share my legacy in the same way
Mm,
that you are doing your mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers and the rest of
thank
your
you.
ancestry. What a beautiful thing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I'm so grateful to Madness Cafe and the two of you for having me on and allowing me to talk about mom's memoir.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. You need to shout this from the rooftops, and we're very grateful that we get to help you shout that from the rooftops.
Thank
It's
you.
a really good book, so everybody please pick up pick up the book for sure. Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Recap?
Ah, yeah. We talk about this all the time, and it doesn't matter how many times we talk about it and I meet people who have gone through horrible things or their families have gone through horrible things. It is always so inspiring to me when those people still have love in their hearts, that are not just consumed by hatred or despair or anything like that. And if anybody could rely on, look what happened to me, this is why I'm the way that I am, it's just so inspiring that people can survive such horrible things and still retain their humanity and their love for other people.
Yeah.
I just and the fact that Susan and her siblings were able to get their mom and, their older relatives to give them the information, to write it down, and then they did. I love that so very much, and the fact that Susan is sharing her family story with all of us is, I mean, it's just such an amazing thing, and there's so much information in here, like I said at the beginning, that a lot of this I didn't know. I mean, there are details in here, like putting the J on the passport or the J on the marriage certificate or changing people's
Middle
names.
names, adding
Right.
the middle names, yeah, I did
Yeah,
not
like,
know
I know
about
about
that.
changing names at Ellis Island because people just didn't give enough of a shit to learn how to spell a different name, but or
No, but
whatever.
this was back in Germany, in their home country.
Right,
Yeah,
but I mean, like, that I didn't know any of that. I mean,
no.
I knew the highlights,
No, we're
quote,
not
unquote.
taught you said it earlier, we are taught the sort of like the surface level of
Mhm.
history, and even that in some cases they're trying to take away.
Yeah, yeah. So there's kids going to school now who may not learn any of this, not even, like, the basics.
Yeah, that's why this book banning stuff is we have to fight against it. Talking about resistance, there is a part of the book that I thought was extremely important. It's on page 90.
Mhm,
It was what we had talked about before. There's a part it says, as he passed small shops, a bakery, a hardware store, he felt himself growing angry. It seemed that all his countrymen were simply going about their lives. They were all carrying on as normal while their Jewish neighbors had been squeezed out of their livelihoods and shipped off to camp. Then to the bottom of the page, Susan's mom writes, what could any one of them do about it anyhow? He thought, shaking his head, his eyes falling closed for a split second. The Christians who had resisted the Führer's rise had been among the first to be jailed.
mhm,
No, he thought, the only way to resist the Reich's power would have been a great many people opposing it all at once at the same time, a majority acting together against what has shown itself to be pure evil.
mhm,
But there had been no appetite for that, and the Fuhrer had played it brilliantly. Each change had been gradual. For years now, each indignity had been introduced one at a time and had been insufficient on its own to inspire much protest. Those who did protest were hauled away. Everyone else gradually grew accustomed to the changes. It had become embarrassing to be Jewish, but it had not been a death sentence.
mhm. Yeah, I underlined literally all of that myself.
That's what I wonder. I remember learning about the Holocaust as a young person, and again, people saying, I wouldn't have been like that. How could they have got a whole population? And then you read the slow changes that happen over time that allow people to get accustomed, that rumors come and then we start to believe this that may or may not
Mhm,
be true. And I think, where are we in our culture right now? Is that happening to us in the United States right now?
mhm.
Are we going through a very similar change? And our I know that's what everybody's somewhat afraid of. When I read this, I and I know I keep bringing up that movie, but when I said that movie, I want to say, wake up, people, wake up.
Yeah,
This is the story of humanity. We always pick an other. We always get tribal. We want to be we're better than them, whether it's religion or skin color or country or sexual orientation
or cast.
or caste. We want to other the other, and that's what all these wars are about. And then you kill
Mhm,
someone from my family, so I'm going to kill someone from your family, so we just fight back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it
mhm.
seems to be the never ending story of horror.
Right. But yes, you're right. I agree with everything you just said. But I think one of the hopeful things that comes out of Susan's mom's story and stories of other people who survive situations where they are traumatized and othered and horribly persecuted. This is where hope comes in for me, is when there's people who go through that and come out of it retaining their humanity and refusing to do the same thing done to them to other people.
Yep, refusing to play this war game.
Exactly, exactly. And so while we can get all the hope and I don't know, positivity from that, we still have to know what those people went through so that we can somehow try to rise up against it when it starts to come around again. And that's what I hope is happening now. I hope that enough people are living that way and reflecting on things that way that they're like, okay, we see what's happening. We see the writing on the wall. We're going to fight against this rise in anti-Semitism, the rise of normalization of hate, the rise of being emboldened to be a general jackass.
No,
That,
worse, to be emboldened to be a murderer.
but exactly, exactly. And but I hope that there are enough of us who see that and are are rising up against it.
And that realize that no human being, no matter what side they're on, of all sides of all of these
Hmm.
dichotomies out there in the world, no human being deserves to be treated in such a manner.
Absolutely.
No human
Absolutely.
being.
We have to learn from history, and God knows it's, you know, the human race is kind of hard headed. It takes us a long time to learn stuff. So
And I do,
thankfully, Susan is sharing the story of her family, which is just one of 6 million, 10 million who have this story, and hopefully we will pay attention.
yeah. And I'd like a call to action for our listeners. If anyone knows a way to help get the book into the school systems, into libraries, to please reach out, take that call
Yeah.
to action. You can call me, you can call Raquel. We can help you get in touch with Susan and maybe
or
get
or
this.
or email us
Yeah.
or whatever. Just, I mean, let us know, because we would love for more people to get their hands on this book. Or if you buy it for yourself, once you're done, pass it on to somebody else. Pass it on to your friend. Pass it on to, your friend's high schooler, or, whoever. Just pass it on to somebody. Leave it in one of those like little free book things that you see in neighborhoods sometimes. Put it in there. Share the book. Share the story. Thanks everyone for listening today. We will be back with more Madness Cafe next week. You can find us on Instagram at Madness Cafe Podcast, or email us at madnesscafepodcast@gmail.com. Bye.